Joining me now, Fox News contributor, former Speaker of the House and collusion author, Newt Gingrich. Newt, thanks for joining us.
Glad to be with you.
It felt like last week with the Mueller testimony that this would be the end, that we would never, ever hear about this yet again. And here we are where more and more Democrats are still climbing on board the impeachment train. What do you make of it?
Well, look, I think that the Democrats don't have any policy ideas that they want to go to the country with. So this is what they're left to talk about in the House. But I watched Mueller last week, and my first reaction was, and I wrote a piece on the newsletter about this Friday, I mean, who wrote the report? It was very clear that Mueller did not write the report. He didn't understand the report. At points, various congressmen were reading back to him his own report to correct what he was saying. So, one, we ought to find out, and I hope Attorney General Barr will really push hard to find out who was really in charge, since obviously Mueller wasn't. But second, I reached the conclusion, after all of this noise, that there was an effort by a government to affect the election of 2016. Unfortunately, that government was the American government under Barack Obama, and it was the FBI and the Justice Department and some other key people in the Obama administration who were trying to affect the election in a way that clearly violates everything we've known about how to elect a president. So right. I came away from all this at least as worried about what the Americans had done illegally and inappropriately to change the election as I am about what the Russians may or may not have done.
So when you say who wrote the report, are you suggesting then that those who did write the report were motivated, politically motivated, and hence, taking us through this 2.5 year, $30 million drama? Is that where you reach your conclusions that perhaps it was the Obama administration,
yeah,
or at least? Yeah.
Well, when I first heard that Mueller was being appointed, I tweeted at the time, and a lot of liberals have cheerfully retweeted since then, that I thought that his record was terrific. He was an upstanding person. He had a clear tradition of being bipartisan. But the man I watched last week, I began to realize that he really wasn't the Mueller of historic fame, that he had come into a job unprepared to do it. I'm assuming that the left-wing Democrats, and that's all he hired, I mean, his lawyers were entirely anti-Trump. I assume they actually ran the project, and the goal of the project was simple. Avoid dealing with the Clintons, avoid dealing with the real sources of corruption, avoid dealing with the people who started the whole Russian story, and focus only on the Trump side of the equation. I think if you were to look at it honestly, it's astonishing how many things the FBI and others were doing to interfere with and undermine the president, and before that the presidential candidate, on a totally one-sided basis.
So how hopeful are you then that this will be, will be revealed through efforts by Barr, the IG report we keep hearing about? Will we get more conclusive evidence of this?
Well, I think from everything I've heard, and I don't know much more than anybody else, but from everything I've heard, the Inspector General is doing a very professional, very thorough job. If, in fact, that comes out with the kind of information I think it will, then I think that Chairman Lindsey Graham of the Senate Judiciary Committee will have an opportunity to establish an investigation. I mean, to look, for example, at why was it if you were for Clinton, you could lie and nothing was done to you. If you were for Trump, you could end up in solitary confinement for months. I mean, you go back and look at exactly the same kind of patterns. It is such an overwhelmingly anti-Trump, protect Clinton process that I have to assume that it was the left-wing lawyers, some of whom, by the way, had worked for Hillary Clinton. Some had actually been at election night party for her. It was not exactly like this was in any way a neutral effort.
I want to talk about the White House shakeup. Director of National Intelligence Dan Coats will be leaving the job next month. President Trump tweeting the announcement yesterday, saying, "I'm pleased to announce that highly respected Congressman John Ratcliffe of Texas will be nominated by me to be the Director of National Intelligence. A former U.S. attorney, John will lead and inspire greatness for the country he loves." Dan Coats, the current director, will be leaving office on August 15th. I would like to thank Dan for his great service to our country. The acting director will be named shortly. Newt, your take on this change?
Well, first of all, I thought John Ratcliffe did an amazing job dealing with Mueller the other day, and I thought he clearly, on television again on Sunday, was remarkably effective. I think he serves on the Intelligence Committee. He's a smart guy. I think he'll probably do a very good job as Director of National Intelligence. Dan Coats has a long career of serving the country in the Congress, but first in the House, then the Senate, then as ambassador to Berlin, and then finally back in the Senate, and then the last couple of years. But I think if the president believes that Ratcliffe is going to be dramatically different from Dan Coats, he's in for a surprise.
Right.
The Director of National Intelligence has to report to the Congress as well as the president, and their number one job, frankly, is to tell the truth, not to prop up policy. Sometimes every president, sooner or later, gets unhappy if the intelligence doesn't fit what their bias was, and I think that Dan Coats said what he thought was true. I have a hunch that John Ratcliffe is going to follow exactly the same process.
I want to talk about the Democrats' divided. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi downplaying tensions with freshman Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, this following their meeting last week. Pelosi tweeted afterward, "Today, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and I sat down to discuss working together to meet the needs of our districts and our country, fairness in our economy and diversity in our country." Well, President Trump just tweeting on the squad just a moment ago. If the Democrats are going to defend the radical left squad and King Elijah's Baltimore failure, it will be a long road to 2020. The good news for the Dems is that they have the fake news media in their pocket. Newt, your thoughts?
Well, look, I thought it was wonderful that Speaker Pelosi met with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and that AOC and she are together. And I think everything we can do to get every Democrat to be with AOC is to the advantage of the Republicans. You have a very radical group. Their views are way to the left of the American people. If the election next year is a choice of which direction we should go in, and the Democrats are represented as they were at the first set of debates. Remember, every single candidate raised their hand and said that they were for giving tax-paid free health care to illegal immigrants. That's a position that I think you get 5 or 6 positions like that, and they could be in for a catastrophe, both in the Congress and in the presidency.
All right, we'll see. Again, Nancy Pelosi going to have a hard time holding off impeachment, another thing that might be driven by the AOC wing of the party. Newt Gingrich, thank you very much. We appreciate all your thoughts.
Good to be with you.